Hello and welcome to We Never Met, the podcast where I have interesting strangers on every single week. Today, if you want to introduce yourself, we have on the podcast
Ryan Browne. I'm CEO and co-founder of Working Draft Beer Company in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah, the E on the end of your last name threw me off a little bit. I didn't know if I wanted to say Browne for some reason, but has that happened a lot or no?
Oh man, my whole life. No problem.
That extra E really throws everyone off.
That's right.
Yeah, and so you're the CEO of Working Draft Beer Company. So I want to even go back further. Like, I read that you first started experimenting. I don't know if this is exactly true with home brewing in graduate school in Alabama. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. That's when I first started home brewing. But kind of my experience with beer and homebrew goes all the way back to being a kid. My dad was a home brewer forever. I always remember having like the smell of something fermenting in our basement.
Sure.
And he did it in this like big green trash can, which is like, upon reflection, I'm like, oh my, okay, well, I don't know what that was all about, but
batches.
It's exactly. And so, I wasn't interested in beer in any way as a kid, but that was definitely happening, in the background of my childhood. And so, when I went out to the University of Alabama, which is in Tuscaloosa, that first semester, just being from Colorado originally, did undergrad in the Midwest, and then going down to the deep South was definitely like a change. And, state of Alabama was never a state I'd ever imagined I would live in. If I were to pick states, I'd probably be at the very bottom of the list. There's numerous kind of cultural things to kind of adjust to, but beer was actually one of them. Towards the end of my undergrad career, I started drinking Boulevard beer, their wheat beer, their pale ale, really starting that kind of entry into craft beer through those Midwest breweries. And so looking forward to kind of trying another region, and then found out there was no beer allowed over 5.5% in Alabama. So they had Prohibition era laws still on the books. And what that functionally meant is nobody distributed down there. So you could get Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, which is great. That's a great beer, but that was pretty much it. Maybe some Sam Adams stuff. Everything else was Natty Ice, Natty Light, Natty Ice Light, or whatever you're going to get. And so, it was right before my second semester, my dad sent out a homebrew kit, made my first batch of beer, in a 5-gallon bucket, not a trash can like him, but, 5-gallon fermentation pail, and with one of my buddies. And that really set the course. It was really fun. We made a Fat Tire clone. So like good Colorado boy, brewing a New Belgian beer. I think really what struck me was we bought it and to celebrate it, and we drank the whole 5 gallons, which is, that's 50 something beers, not nothing. But some faculty showed up and, tried the beer, and I was just like, this is amazing. This, that like, look at all these people here. They're all enjoying themselves, and really that, I think, reflecting on it and reflecting on kind of the path of what now Working Draft has taken, that was really an influential part of, what ended up being Working Draft. And this project was really like looking at how beer brings people together, because I know that beer tasted terrible. There's no way it was good, Fat Tire clone, fermented probably at like 80, 85 degrees, and, but everybody drank it anyway, and everybody was having a ball. And so it was really like a great opportunity to see the ability for beer to be a catalyst for people to get together. And then when the beer is delicious, how much it amplifies those opportunities and those relationships. So that really had a major impact, I think, upon reflection on our company.
Yeah. Even looking at how you guys set up in Madison and your facility, you can tell that is still true today. Like, community is a very big aspect of how you guys see the brewery and see where it's going. I wanted to ask about being in Colorado, because I had, Kyle Vetter, who is 1840 Brewing on the podcast, and he lived in Colorado and said how much more fast paced it was than Wisconsin at the time. So when you were growing up, was the craft brewery scene in Colorado already like exploding or no?
No, not really. I mean, there was, I remember, downtown Colorado Springs. I'm from Colorado Springs originally, like an hour south of Denver. And there was Phantom Canyon Brew Pub that opened up downtown, like one of the, kind of first wave, not like early 90s, craft beer kind of made that resurgence, and then that bubble kind of burst, and then it kind of came back again. But Phantom Canyon was a place, and I remember they had like a Hefeweizen, and it was like, I'd never seen a beer like that before. I wasn't drinking it, but my dad orders it, with a slice of, a lemon slice in there. And I was like, it's so cloudy and everything. Like, I was like, what is this? And then they had the proper, vice glass. So it was really tall. And it was just like, this looks so foreign to, the Coors banquet in the fridge or my dad's homebrew bottles, my dad would use repurposed, soda bottles. So like they said, like Dr. Pepper, like big glass, Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew bottles, which also led to some like confusion.
Accidentally trying to get
exactly. Totally. But yeah, I mean, so it wasn't really happening at that point, having been back now, Weldworks just opened up a place in Colorado Springs, and, there was that was just like, I can't even keep up. There's no way I can keep up. And my family's now mostly in Fort Collins, and that's the same, like a lot of places, you have that overlap of the places that really hit the ground in the 90s, or kind of the stalwarts, right, that have been around. And then you got every, just so many places like Working Draft popping up everywhere, and you have that in Fort Collins too, with Odell and New Belgium, of course. And here in Madison specifically, you have Capital Brewing, which was part of that first wave too in the 90s, really like just doing innovative German lager brewing, on the craft scale. And they're still here. And then you got a bunch of other people, like us that were influenced, by them. But the pace now too. And I know this from, so the brewery opened in 2018, and, there's a lot of planning that obviously goes into that. And by planning, I mean like traveling to a lot of tap rooms, trying lots of beers. Yeah. That was something I definitely noticed in Colorado, and my brother's in the Bay Area. So getting out to California and checking out places out there. And I would say absolutely like the pace of life, not the pace of life, but like pace of development. So 2018, we opened one of our first beers, Hazy IPA, and really nobody was making a Hazy IPA in Madison in 2018. And in Denver was making a Hazy IPA in 2018, like it had happened already there. And so, we just kind of, we had that beer, and it took off. It was Pulp Culture, which is now our, it's our kind of flagship. If we were to have a flagship, that was the interesting thing, kind of seeing that kind of lag almost that happened. I think that's definitely, even since 2018, totally shortened that lag, because now you got places in the Midwest. Obviously like toppling Goliath, if you're going to talk about like Decorah, or, even the Twin City breweries, or even Milwaukee, all the Milwaukee breweries that are totally doing innovative stuff and ahead of the, way ahead of the curve in some capacities. So that's definitely like, I think we had this really interesting moment in history where we're kind of at the verge of opening with it almost felt like a cheat sheet of like where trends were going to go. Sure. And preferences and flavor profiles and things like that. And, but I think that's significantly shortened at this point.
So not being exposed really to like the craft brewery scene in Colorado necessarily, because it hasn't started yet, and going down to Alabama where they can't even really brew beer over a certain limit. What led to your like idea for like starting a craft brewery, and also in Madison specifically? Sure. Where did that come from? Was it just like the community, and you're like, well, this is actually something that I could feasibly see us doing, or where did that come from?
I think as a home brewer and a long time home brewer, that's like every home brewer's dream. Yeah. It's like, okay, like, oh, I could do this. This is great. What a world this would be if this was my job, Yeah. In the hobby turning profession thing and everything that comes along with that too. After my time in Alabama, my wife got a postdoc position here at UW-Madison. And so that's what prompted our move from Alabama out here. And then she was able to move that into a tenure track faculty position. And now she has tenure as well. But when we saw that she was getting that when she secured that position and really having access to her research in a way that very few places in the country would be able to match in terms of UW Madison's infrastructure and ability to pursue her research. That felt like kind of the green light on the personal side of things to really seriously pursue starting a brewery and moving it from kind of fantasy daydream, half planning, to, okay, like, I think this is something that I could, with the safety and security really of my wife's position, like, be able to kind of roll dice on. And so that was really kind of the impetus of it. And from there, I think, one, being a home brewer, two, my business partner owns the Wine and Hop Shop, which is the locally owned, home beer and winemaking supply store here in Madison. He bought it from the original owner who opened it in 1972, like before home brewing was even legal. He was one of the first. He would go to Chicago and Milwaukee to buy, to get his hops off the planes that were coming in from abroad.
It's like a drug cartel. Yeah,
it was, man. Yeah, I mean, and actually, this is great. They had the malt, like the Muntons malt and everything, the liquid malt extract. They would print the like a beer recipe on I think it was either the underside of the can lid or on the back side of the label. Wow. Because it was not legal, but they were like, well, hey, if you're going to like ferment this, like you might want to also add these ingredients and kind
of want to check this out. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, it was like very, very much like, covert kind of, knock 3 times and this isn't just for bread baking kind of thing. But, anyway, I worked at the Wine and Hop Shop for a number of years and managed that for a number of years, through that position and through that work, just was introduced to everybody in the craft beer industry, because that's, the homebrew supply store is that nexus, between a lot of the professional brewing and a lot of the, just homebrew amateur brewers, hobby brewers, especially as this new wave kind of came, how many homebrewers have started breweries. But even then, like established breweries run by brewers that don't have, any homebrewing experience, you end up short a bag of Carapils sometimes, or 25 pounds of flaked oats, or, or you're doing a pilot batch and you don't want to order 44 pounds of, fill in the blank, Brewer's Gold or something like that. So you order a pound from the homebrew supply store. So you start getting connected to people within the industry through that route. And I think that makes it feel more achievable, I think, in starting one, because you're like, oh, okay, I'm getting to know these people. They're normal people. They're not, the rock stars and stuff. Because I mean, that's a big part of craft industry that's happened is, you look at the big brands and they have these huge personalities behind them, right? St. Gaglione, like being like maybe one of the biggest, who had a TV show and everything, and you're just like, wow, these are like, they're like celebrities, and
right.
And so you get to know people are real and have other interests and things like that. And I think that helps break down the barriers. And something similar happened to me in grad school, honestly, too. I was one of the years that I was there, my job was to help run the visiting reading series. And so we got some super famous poets coming to town, and it was great to pick, some of them were like poet with a capital P, and that's all they wanted to talk about. And it was like, okay. But some of them were just like, I just want to watch the Knicks game tonight. And, like, I don't want to talk about sonnets or rhyme schemes or like, no way. And so, that helped me feel like I could be a writer, I think, in a way that it opened up the possibility of what it meant to be a writer. Did it redefine what it meant to be a writer in a way I hadn't really thought about before? And I think the same thing happened in the brewing industry, getting to know all the great brewers in town who are great people and be like, oh, wow, okay. Like that's a possibility,
Yeah. It broke down those like barriers of entry. It's almost like when I talk about this with artists a lot, where in school, we were often taught like you can only really make money off of art if you do it this way, and then you as you slowly break down those barriers and meet more people, you're like, oh, there actually is a ton of ways you can do it. It's not just this one way.
That's right. That's exactly right, man.
And so when you were traveling around, you sort of mentioned this a little bit. Was that at a stage where you were surely going to start a brewery at that point? Or were you just sort of like testing the waters and seeing like what other people were doing and if it was feasible for you?
It was a little both, you know, like as things kind of got more serious on some of the trips, it was like, okay, like I'm really trying to take a more critical eye when I'm sitting here to, you know, what are the offerings here? What's the menu look like? You know, what are the aesthetics? But certainly when we were a brewery in planning, you know, and going through that process, absolutely, like trying to get to, you know, a number of tap rooms, you know, in terms of just like covering the breadth of it to see what's out there, but then also returning frequently, you know, again and again to the places that really struck me as places I wanted to spend time, you know, and then just going there and being like, okay, what is it about this place that I just love being here and I love spending my money here, you know? And in some places like love fighting a crowd to be here and wait for a chair for 20 minutes, you know, like edged up with a pint on my chest, like getting warm instead of either getting kind of frustrated by that moment or whatever, but just kind of being like, okay, how is this place doing this? You know, and examine my experience of it. And then often being there with friends or family that knew I was on this journey too. And so like, kind of multiplying the open eyes and ears and experiences and really like having them talk to me about what they're experiencing. What do they like about this place? You know, they're one of my favorite places in the Bay Area, you know, it just gets jam packed. I mean, which makes sense. Great beers. And I didn't mind it, you know, being like wedged in there and everything like, you know, and I mean, it gave like a, you know, a buzz to the place and a lot of energy. And I remember talking to my wife and her sister, and they're like, we hate going there because like when you're a woman and you're just getting bumped up against all the time, it is not comfortable. Like it's not enjoyable, you know, and like you know, they're not huge into beer either, but that really played a factor in the design of our space is, okay, you know, I want my wife and her sister to feel comfortable in our tap room, you know, as often as possible. Can we always guarantee that? No. You know, do we get slammed and, you know, full to the brim? Sometimes we do, which is amazing. But, you know, that's there, you know, we try to design a space that was like, we could accommodate a lot of different intersections of our community. And so, yeah, in terms of traveling around, it was just like, man, got to get to this place again. Got to try their beers. Again, you know, like I said, partly in terms of like what's in their lineup, how are they making these beers for kind of like industry research, you know, like, okay, we're going to drive our production schedule, but then also, you know, really working on like that customer experience, because that was going to be a critical element of our success, knowing the size of our brewery, which is only a 7-barrel brewery, knowing we're very much a taproom model base, no distribution except maybe a handful of kegs. It was really going to be the people getting the pint glass over the bar and their enjoyment of the product, of the experience, of the space. That was going to be critical. So,
yeah, I mean, your wife probably speaks for a lot of people though. So it was nice that you had that alternative experience. 'Cause like, I'm that way too. I'm like, I need some space. You know? And it's interesting because when you talk about like the space aspect, it's so important to like a brewery or a bar or wherever you're going. There's a specific bar in Milwaukee that I will not name, but there's a bar in Milwaukee that I loved. Like it was like my favorite bar because it was, when it was crowded, it felt like intimate and cozy, but it wasn't like overcrowded. And then they moved to, they might know who they are at this point. They moved to a much larger space, and it just like threw everything out of whack. You know, it felt like a lot less intimate and cozy, and like that you wanted to actually go there. It felt a lot more cold. So I feel like this space is such an important part too of any business. Yeah,
it totally is. I mean, and like I said, for our business, you know, it makes or breaks it. That was something that we spent a lot of time on, like a lot of sweat, a lot of money, you know, went into that, you know, thinking through the customer experience as best we could. And, you know, and there's still things that you just don't get right, and you don't know you're going to get right until you get people in the space.
Right.
But, you know, like for me, it was like, okay, sitting at a community table, I wasn't super used to it coming from Colorado and the Midwest. You don't really see that. But then like when I went and visit my brother in the Bay Area and we're sitting in places, you know, and you're just like pull up a stool right next to somebody and you're touching elbows basically, and then maybe you're talking to them, and they like all of a sudden you're having drinks with somebody you have no idea. And I was like, this is amazing actually. How fun, but then realizing like, what we tried to do in our tap room was cherry pick like the best of all the places we saw. Right. Sure. So, we got really high ceilings because we're in an old like production facility. So we got 16-foot ceilings, exposed beams on top. So we have that industrial vibe, but we also wanted to bring that kind of intimacy down too. And so we have kind of this lounge area with 2 couches and 2 comfy chairs and a fireplace and like a bookshelf with like games, which isn't totally abnormal or, totally out of the ordinary, but our designer dropped a drop ceiling basically that's suspended by wires just on its own from the ceiling over that just area. Like a 20 by 20 space. So, within this larger footprint and this larger cavernous space, you can kind of tuck yourself away underneath, in this kind of living room area. Yeah. And it's surprisingly effective and surprisingly intimate within a larger space.
Yeah, that's cool.
We have community tables, we got 4 top tables, we got bar tables, we got standing tables, like trying to find, a spot for most people, and without running too much of the risk. There's the old adage in like marketing, if you market to everyone, you're marketing to no one.
Right.
And I think that's very much the case in running any sort of consideration for your business. But, how comfortable people are in the space, man, that's make or break, especially with more and more competition, like if people had a bad experience, even if the beer's great, boy, they're probably not going to come back.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to have a good beer in a place that you don't want to be.
It really is.
Yeah,
it is. Because part of the good beer, I think is the trappings of it, right? Like you go to a tap room and I think there's times where that beer can be, accentuated, the quality of it because of who you're with.
Right.
It's sunny outside. It's, cause that's all part of our, we're not just a palate, right? We're all of these senses, we're this history, we're these future looking desires, like all of that stuff, and then you strike that with a pint of beer and it like timestamps, like ring in a hot wax seal kind of thing. And it's either gonna, it's either the impression you want or it's not, but it's there, and it can be a lot of work to undo that wax imprint, a lot of energy to do that, a lot of heat, a lot of focus to be able to do that without torching the whole letter.
No, it is interesting because I can remember specific breweries that me and my fiance went to and moments at that brewery, like in my mind, perfectly.
Totally. Yeah. And those are awesome moments, aren't they? Like, they're really like just those satisfying, wonderful moments. And that's something I've just been over and over, like humbled by and thrilled beyond I could even imagine by when we get notes from people that are like, our first date was at your place and now we're getting married. And I'm like, what? Like that is bonkers to me, and like so amazing, because we're part of that history of this couple of these people coming together. Like, I mean, that transcends a business, that really does in a way that art does, that there's pieces of art and paintings and books and things that really, become a part of someone's life. And that's, man, I didn't expect that kind of feeling to come from being a business owner at all. It is there.
There's not that many businesses where that can happen either, and so I think it's really cool, and it speaks to your space and environment in your brewery that, on a first date, that can make an impression to get married, like that's the space to go to. You're now like the first date spot in Madison.
But man, I think though too, like we have such great guests that come in and customers. Like that's the other thing. Like you said, not every business, because not every industry could be like craft beer, where there's so many awesome people from top to bottom, whether you're talking about the brewers, the owners, down to the craft beer fans and enthusiasts, and of course you're going to get pockets of people, who kind of take it in their own direction and do what they do with any interest, and engagement that conflicts with other parties, with other groups. But like overall, man, you get people coming into craft beer that want to try something new. They're wanting to see what's around the bend. They like whatever is drawing them to a craft brewery drew me to a craft brewery. So it makes sense, it makes sense in a way, but it's also like so much goes back to how great the people that come into the tap room are. And especially as a new business, I mean, God, how patient people are with us, and like forgiving, where it's just like internet's down or, didn't get our menus printed today yet, but we're getting there. And as you kind of like bootstrapping and building your systems out, people still keep coming back and keep cheering you on. And it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So do you remember, like we were talking about those feelings that you got when you were at a place that you really enjoyed? What were those things? Like what were the things that stuck out to you that made you feel a certain way about the breweries you visited?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question, man. I mean, I think, for me, again, like just starting with the beer, that was like really, all these other things are hugely important, right?
Sure.
Customer experience and tap room and all that stuff. But man, it is the beer, right? Like it's got to come back to the beer. And, for me, it's being in a tap room. Let me get specific because that'll be helpful. Going to Odell's tap room and seeing that they had experimental IPAs. This is maybe 6-7 years ago.
Sure.
Didn't even have names on them. It was just the hops, like X97 IPA, and then they had another one that was like X26 or something like that. And I was like, okay, like I'm going to get those both. Yeah. And sitting down in front of these two tulips of beer and smelling one that was like the most overwhelming garlic, like pungent, dank.
Yeah.
I have not to this day had that type of aromatic experience. Like, yeah. And it blew me away. Like I couldn't believe it. And the other one was like great tropical fruity, but like, I don't know, awash in like all of those other descriptors that we hear about so many hops now. Yep. But this one was just like, I kept coming back to that and I keep thinking about that beer and I have no idea what hop that was. And it was probably so pungent, it never made it out of the trial, like experimental phase,
Yeah.
But like, man, like they made that and it blew me away and it gave me a perception, like a sense perception that I'd never encountered, especially in a beer, like that they decided to use that. Cause there's,
right.
They definitely knew the qualities of that hop. They may not have known how expressive. I know. Exactly. Yeah. But like, it was just like, wow. So they did that, so like starting with the beer, you just get these moments when you're engaged, when you like encounter a new beer for the first time, that's doing something different. Like whether it's like the biggest wallop of coffee, or, that type of hop aromatic, or man, like the bready, crisp dryness of like a beautifully made lager, that's like so much flavor, but then it's like, but it's not on my palate anymore. Where'd it go? Like I want another sip, and then you're like, oh, I can have 5 of these, and so for me, that's a huge part. I think what really struck me as I kept starting to go to tap rooms though, was that energy. Like there always seemed to be such a brightness in a tap room. And that didn't necessarily mean that it had to be like actual physical light, right? But there was like this hum. It was like a live wire, and it almost felt like you were like touching that live wire when you're in those tap rooms and that you were tasting these beers. And then you look around, it's just, people are just drinking beer. There's nothing else, there's no wine, there's no cider, there's not even food in a lot of places, but everybody's there enjoying these beers and kind of buying into the same thing. Not necessarily, I mean, you're kind of having the same conversation by sharing the same beer. That was just like super powerful to me. And again, like very communal and like comforting in ways that are hard to articulate, I think.
I mean, there's something cool too to having beers that are more exclusive too, like the ones that they're just trying out and you can actually go there and try these things that they're just experimenting with.
Totally.
Like, that's cool.
Oh man. Yeah. Totally geek out on that stuff, and we have a 1-barrel pilot system, basically like a glorified homebrew system, but that's been a fun thing to have rockin'. It allowed our brewer to test out ingredients, obviously like a true pilot system, but it also allowed us to keep the tap menu fresh. We get a lot of people, they're like, I was here 2 weeks ago and like, you guys have 8 new beers, it's like you guys have, and cause we churn through, 1840, those guys churn through tons of beers too. And we got a new place that opened up here, right off the capital, Youngblood, and their head brewer came from Hacienda, Kyle, and they're just a great group of folks there. And they're just brew different styles, and that was a fun thing that we've been doing too as Working Draft is just keeping things moving along on the tap list, and that those small systems help, and then it adds that element of like, we only made 2 kegs of this, and so it's not going to be around for very long. You're lucky if it's around for a week, and that, so you got to come and get it. The other fun thing that we got to do that kept with that small system, and that kind of makes it experimental, is that we'd use it for different purposes, like community engagement, so we'd raffle off, a brew day basically with our head brewer. And so, silent auction, we would donate to like silent auctions, so this person, basically bids to get a beer brewed up with Working Draft, and they get to pick the name, they pick the style. They bring in a beer if they had a beer of like what they wanted to make or something, give our brewer a heads up on like, okay, I want it to taste like this, but hoppier, So we get to have a beer with a brewer, with our brewer, and then we throw a release party and promote it on social. And that was always super fun. And then we would do that as fundraiser mechanisms for PTOs and other not-for-profits in Madison. And then we would use it internally. We would have a crew brew program, which is, that pungent, crazy IPA I had from Odell, I think was part of their similar kind of notion that everybody on the team gets to brew a batch of beer on their, I think it's a 5-barrel pilot system at Odell. And so we do a similar thing, and so everybody top to bottom gets to brew a batch of beer and name it and put it on tap and, kind of celebrate it. And that's been a blast too, in terms of getting like exclusivity and like this wonderful connection to everybody.
Yeah, I'll have to like donate to a charity or something and try to get a podcast beer or something made or something like that.
That's right.
That's
right.
That would be really cool. But no, I actually had one of the co-founders. I had Tom Dufek on from Youngblood.
Oh, awesome.
Podcast. Yeah.
That's great.
So I feel like I've had a ton of different, I've had a guy from Eagle Park in Milwaukee as well. But I just want to ask, like, how did you, because it seems like not only you enjoy a lot of different styles, but you brew a lot of different styles at the brewery. Like, how did you figure out where you wanted to go with the beer specifically? Because as you said, like having good beer is like the most important part. So how did you decide like what to focus on and where to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the main driving things that we did was like, let's make beers we want to drink to start off with, because, at the end of the day, we're going to have a shift beer at the end of the night. And I want it to be delicious, And so, I mean, that really guided a lot of it. Our background in home brewing helped influence this. So, obviously my business partner, one of my business partners, owns the homebrew shop. I managed it. Our head brewer, that's where we met our now head brewer and co-owner, Clint. He was working at the wine and hop shop. He left to go start his commercial brewing career. So he brewed House of Brews here in Madison, then Vintage Brewing, which won Small Brew Pub of the Year last year at GABF.
Wow.
And then went to Wisconsin Brewing, which is a huge facility that was started by the folks that originally kind of opened up Capital Brewing. And so he sharpened his teeth kind of in industry that direction, but he always had the background as a home brewer. But his entry, I've heard him say this before, like he started home brewing to get into commercial brewing, which is like the backwards direction, right? And like for most people, it's like, I'm a home brewer and I pivot that to professional brewing. We really, I mean, Clint one is an incredibly creative and, like really meticulous brewer. He also knew how to run a 30-barrel brew house at Wisconsin Brewing and what that type of production schedule looked like. And, all of the moving parts of something like that size of a brewery.
Right.
So when he stepped onto our 7-barrel system, I mean, the first beer he made on our system was a double batch of German Pilsner. And it was like, that's awesome. Like, I just love that, and Clint's like such a humble guy, but he really set that bar. He's like, look, when we open, I want to open with a German Pilsner. That's good, and we didn't get our filter in time. So it was a Zwickel beer, so an unfiltered.
Sure.
But it was delicious, and it was like, this is great. Like, in terms of what we decide to brew, he sets the tone a lot on what things does he want to pursue? What's he interested in? Obviously, because we're running a business, we want to keep in mind what makes sense for us to brew, from a bottom line perspective. But that certainly doesn't drive the conversation. And I think because we're a tap room, we're fortunate enough that doesn't have to drive the conversation. Like what's a best selling style, or do we have to keep hopping on trends and following trends? Because again, we're playing off of not only the quality of the beer, but the experience of drinking the beer. That's one reason why COVID's been so brutal in having to package everything and not having our physical space, because it's
right.
That's like playing with one hand tied behind our back. Even though it's a strong hand, the beer is I'm biased. Obviously, Clint makes great beer.
Sure.
But yeah, so it was like we knew we wanted to open with a Pilsner. We knew we wanted to open with at least one West Coast IPA, which we thought would be kind of our flagship. We kind of looked around and didn't see a lot of beers being made like we would find out on the West Coast or in Portland, where it's like very minimal crystal malt, real, give us some nice pine, firm bitterness. And so we opened with one of those, and then our Hazy IPA and a couple other kind of more standard beers, but kept adding lager beers to our portfolio, which has been really fun. And Clint's really sharpened his teeth on that too, and really pushed to continue to elevate his lager brewing. And those are some of the most phenomenal beers. He just put out a Czech Pilsner that right before the holidays that we just sold out of. That was like almost a dead ringer for Pilsner or Kel. So like, he's really doing a nice job with that. But on the flip side, I remember when we were at GABF a couple years ago, we went to Four Noses, which is in Broomfield right outside Denver. And man, we had one of the best hazy IPAs I've ever had. And Clint was like, and we already had, one or two hazies maybe that we were kind of rotating through. And he drank that beer and he was like, I want to make this, like, I want to make something like this, this is so good. How are they doing this? And that like just set him down that path of like, okay, let me dial in the kind of this type of hazy I'm looking for. This flavor profile. So, so much of it again just kind of leads back to, I like this so much, I want to make this now, and that's being the inspiration. And that's what it was as a home brewer too. Like I loved Stone, let me try to make Stone IPA. Let me try to make an Arrogant Bastard clone, those kinds of things. And that really pushes us in that direction, of what kind of makes it into the final production schedule.
No, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people, myself included, like they know sort of like, I guess, abroad what style they like if they like IPAs or something. But there's so many little categories in them. It gets confusing sometimes. It's like, oh yeah, would I like a hazy IPA? I'm not even sure what that is.
Exactly.
Maybe, I guess.
Totally.
So yeah,
and that was a surprising beer. It was a fun, surprising beer because again, we didn't think it was going to be the beer. A hazy IPA we didn't think would be the beer that we were going to sell most of. I think some of that was being naive to the how hot and like on fire that style kind of was, like growing more and more. But two, the flavor profile, it makes sense. It's a little less bitter. It's very tropical fruit. It's soft mouthfeel. It's a very approachable beer. So we actually get a lot of people that come in who are kind of self-professed non-IPA fans, and they'll try a sip of our hazy IPAs and go, wow, I'm surprised, and it's not, I don't think it's just our beer. I think it's that style. I mean, obviously our beer is good, but I think it's the approachability of that style that's really led to it being so ubiquitous for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things I feel like as I've gone to more and more craft breweries and try more and more craft beer, I've almost been told like by people that it's like, if you go to a brewery, you should try their IPA because that's how you know if it's good or not. Yeah. Which seems ridiculous because I feel like you can do a lot of different beers really well. Yeah,
that's so funny that you say that because the adage I've heard and like hear some brewers talk about is you go into a brewery and you get the lightest possible lager.
That's what I've heard from brewers. Yeah. The other one was from more just commoners,
But it's true. I mean, and that's the thing, like at the end of the day, people, taste is so personal, right? It's so subjective. And so people are going to like it or they're not going to like it. And again, that's where we try to, it's hard not to fall into the trap, but that's like, let's just brew what we want to drink. you know, and do that as best we can. And then just that people will be excited about that enough. Right. And we'll hit enough pallets, you know, strike enough pallets in a way that's going to be, you know, lead to a successful business, you know, because I think if you're out there trying to brew for someone else, or some external purpose, you know, I'm not sure the sustainability of that, honestly.
Or just how much you would enjoy the day to day, you know?
Exactly.
I feel like it would just become this thing of like, because everyone likes something different. So it just becomes, you just have no direction really.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think I've heard that from brewers because it's harder it's easier to mess up a later beer, right? It's easier to make it taste bad.
Sure. I mean, especially lagers, you know, and this is why, you know, like a Pilsner Urquell type beer, that like an homage to Pilsner Urquell that Clint brewed, I think is so impressive. You know, it's 4.2%. It's golden, you know, I mean, just like crystal clear. You could read a book through it. Yeah. You know, it's like effervescent, filtered. But yeah, it's because there's, you know, lager brewing, you know, is happening at a cooler temperature. You know, fermentation can be more tricky. So your yeast handling, your quality assurance, you know, your fermentation profile, recipe formulation, you know, like you can dry hop flaws out of a beer, you know, if like easier than you can lager, you know, cold condition flaws out of a beer. Yeah. And so I think that's where that adage comes from, is it can show the technical chops, I think. Yeah, sure. Not necessarily in a way that hoppy beers can't. But it's a particular kind of technical chops that I think hits a lot of different registers. I mean, but of course you talk about the best IPA brewers, and they're, again, super, you know, the attention to detail and the thoroughness and the vision for what the beer is going to be, and the quality assurance is just off the charts, you know? And that's why they're the best. Right. You know?
Yeah. So when you were like starting to make plans to like create the brewery and things like that, and you saw, as you stated, all these other breweries like popping up, not only in Wisconsin, but all over. What was like what did the meetings look like? And what were you guys sort of pitching to each other to make your brewery different and stand out and sort of stand the test of time?
Well, and like to go all the way back, like, you know, it was like, let's start this in my garage and we'll do like small batches, and like, oh man, we won't even label the bottles, and it'll be all like,
or like, Dr. Pepper, put Dr. Pepper on them.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. And so like wild stuff like that, like really like just like letting it fly, you know, in terms of those early brainstorming sessions, you know, and like running the gamut, you know. Ultimately, I think how we were able to land on what we have done at Working Draft was through a ton of conversations with each other, but then also a lot of people in the industry, and learning and listening, like just striking up those conversations and booking time and taking it seriously, and listening to what people have to say, and hearing a lot of people in the industry say the same thing, you know? And so we're like, okay, we got to listen to that. But then for some reason, certain things were resonating. So like, here's a great example. When we were looking at, okay, what size brewery do we buy, right? Like, what's our capacity? Are we going to get a 10 barrel, 20 barrel, you know, 5 barrel, 3 barrel? We approached that question in a couple ways. One, we kind of ran some modeling and scenarios of, okay, you know, what's our actual volume production that we can do here? Sure. What's the labor going to cost? What's the actual revenue and profit margins that we can make, you know, with this size, right? So that was one. Two was hearing people from the industry, and we heard mostly, you guys are going to outgrow your system in a couple years, so you should buy one that's bigger and grow into it. And so we were like, okay, so we're like looking at 10 barrel, 15 barrel, 20 barrel breweries, and there were only a handful of people, 3, maybe 4 people, that told us go with like a 5 or 7 barrel system. Like, you know, you guys are looking at Taproom Model, 15 barrels, 20 barrels, even 10 barrels can be a huge volume of beer to turn over. You know, so
just sorry to interrupt, but just so people know in the context, like, oh sure, what would that be equivalent? Like, what 5 to 7?
Thanks. Yeah.
In a tap room. Yeah. What would that be? What would that look like?
Yeah. Such a great question. So 1 barrel volume is 2 kegs, like basically 2 like kegger kegs.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So, our system just produces only 14 kegs,
Gotcha.
which might sound like a lot, but that's nothing compared to, a lot of other breweries. I mean, we're small. We're definitely a small brewery.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted
No,
to
that's
context.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Great question. Great question. So so when we're like, okay, we can make, 40 kegs at a time versus 14, the labor numbers on that are awesome, right? Because it's like, it takes the same amount of time to brew.
Sure.
It takes the same length of time to ferment.
Right.
The packaging time is, it's a little bit longer. It's negligible. Right.
Right.
But your volume, and then you have a ton of volume, and it's like, oh, well, that's a no brainer. Right. And then when you look at the cost of a system between a 7-barrel up to a 20-barrel, it's honestly not that much. We're not talking 3 times as much, even though the volume is 3 times, the volume output is 3 times, the cost really tends to not be when we were looking at stuff. As you start adding brew house size, you got to start adding automation and other things that can start like having cascading effects. But anyway, there's just a handful of people, and we, and it started to make more and more sense to us. And like, honestly, the last person to tell us that was the person selling us our system. So we got a brand new system from WM Sprinkman, which is located here in Wisconsin. They make breweries for all over the place. They're now owned by Crohn's. And Nicole was the person that we worked with, and she was like a former, I think, nuclear engineer or something like that. Wow. Turned, brew house, just do everything. She's awesome, rock star. She's like, you guys, like a 7-barrel, like, seems perfect for what you guys want to do. Like, I don't know why you want to go any bigger. She talked us out of some of the bell and whistle automation that maybe our brewer wishes we had now, but, at the time saved us like 10, 15 grand.
Yeah.
Which is not, that's not negligible number.
Right.
And so, I think that was a really interesting thing that a part of the conversation that struck me as, noteworthy was how we made a strategic decision against the overwhelming advice that we heard from people, which was to buy bigger.
Right.
And I wish I could tell you why we made that decision, but I think it was partly because we were running the numbers and we were crunching the numbers. And then also like hearing from people that we trusted and had multiple conversations with, and they were making sense along with our numbers. And I'm really happy that we went with the size we did, because it does keep us super nimble, super flexible. We can, if we make like the last batch of a brute IPA that we made, which is like basically like a dead style now, we only had 14 kegs of it, so we sold it totally before, like totally in its prime. It was great. And then we weren't sitting on, 50 kegs of a beer we can't sell. So it was really a fortunate turn of events for us to be able to take and listen to that advice.
Yeah. And so at your brewery as well, like there's a community focus, but there's also a focus on art too. And I know you have a past as well with poetry and writing and even teaching as well. And so how did that tie in with when you first concepted the brewery? How did art and all that tie in with what you wanted to do?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. The notion of art is kind of shot through the whole company, even from like Working Draft, the name. Which is a great encapsulation of that engagement of artistic creativity. One of the best ways I've ever heard it, and I've definitely like co-opted, I wish I could remember where I got it from, but brewing being the artful application of science. It's one of the best definitions I've heard, which is exactly what it is. Clint has access virtually to all the ingredients that every brewer on the planet does. Right. It's what, it's the artistic and strategic decisions he makes. The artistic and creative decisions he makes that make the beers make them artful. In the same way, when I sit down to write a poem or any author sits down, I'm not making up my own language, right? I have access to the same raw material of English language that everybody else does. It's how you're using that, and how you're conceiving of it, and what that, that whole creative process is really what sets it apart. And so we really try to take that to heart in our approach to the business, not just the name, but, we have a 200 plus square foot mural that's on the wall that we commissioned from a local muralist, Jenny Gao. And it was really critical that we contract her and pay her an actual like honorarium and fee, and a contract to do that. And we have a licensing fee with her for any time we use that image for profit, because, her value, that is her art. It is a value to the community, and she deserves, compensation for that.
Right.
So, so obviously, like, engagement in visual arts, and, we've had poetry readings. We always have a rotating visual artist in house. I think also, though, the notion of just how we try to approach, or how Clint tries to approach the brewing process as well. Like I said, where he's really taking it as a learning opportunity, as a way to create and experiment with ingredients and process and things like that really hit home, I think. And I love that, like there's this interesting tension, I think, in art and certainly in brewing, where there's a freedom and there's a push to creativity with when boundaries or constraints or obstructions are actually erected. Like, so the idea of, it can be too much to just like have free for all, right? Like, where do I go? I could go anywhere.
Where do I even start? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But like in writing, like with a sonnet, like I have to fit my message into this format, right? There's a rhyme scheme, there's a meter, there's only a certain number of lines, and so I have to make that work. And what it does is it forces you to make decisions, artistic decisions, creative decisions, and problem solve in a way that you'd never do, because you wouldn't have had to, right? It forces your hand in a direction. And so I think that happens in the brew house and happens in running a business. Like, I have to work against this constraint, right? Like, so when Clint sits down to brew like a Dortmunder export lager or a Doppelbock or a Hazy IPA, he can't make a Hazy IPA that's so far afield that nobody will ever recognize it as a Hazy IPA, because he's brewed something else at that point. So he's got these parameters. And so that forces him to make choices within that box, because we always talk about thinking outside the box, which is true as a metaphor, but it's also thinking, like, forcing yourself to play within the box is equally important sometimes, because it forces your hand to make creative decisions that I think eventually allow you to transcend the box. It's kind of like that interesting process, a little bit of a different kind of take on that kind of constraint side of things, that I've noticed in the writing world that seems to help, be like a helpful lens for me to understand what we're doing in the brewery too.
Yeah, no, I actually talked to an artist recently that had the very same sentiment of like giving yourself parameters sometimes helps you actually be more creative, because you're forced to make these little twists and turns within the set of parameters that like you would never have done, because if you're just like, yeah, I can just do whatever, you weren't forced to think in this specific way. So it's super helpful for sure.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, before we go here, I want to talk about how can people like support your brewery and what you're doing even during this time? Like where can they go and where can they purchase things and do things to help out?
That's great, man. Yeah. www.workingdraftbeer.com is our website. That'll link you into our e-commerce store. Being in Wisconsin, we're not allowed to ship beer out of state. So that's going to be a prohibitive, but any of our merchandise, and things like that, we can get it out to the rest of the country. If you know anybody traveling into Madison or Milwaukee area, that's an opportunity for them to swing by. We're doing to-go sales. Our tap room's not open, but they can grab, 4-pack, a mixed 4-pack, single cans, whatever it might be to get that moving. And so I think that's the biggest way, is kind of continuing to support not only us, but every local craft breweries in the same boat as us. I mean, it's just, we're getting hammered. I mean, like all local restaurants and everybody are getting hammered. So, just check us out on our website, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on our socials at Working Draft Beer, and just kind of see what we're up to.
Awesome. Yeah, because since you guys do rotate stuff often, is there a way to like see what you're releasing? Like, do you release that on social media and stuff?
Yeah, we'll give previews. We have a calendar on our website too that lists kind of our pop-ups, but also when we have them zeroed in on a release date, we'll put our release dates of beers up there as well. So you can kind of have an idea of what's coming down the pipeline.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited when the pandemic is over and I can come visit the tap room and go on a date with my fiance there.
That's right, man.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. And yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Same here, Sam. Appreciate it, man.